Welcome back
Curtis
to
Preston.
welcome back to Happy Hour again. I am Curtis Taylor. I'm here with Jason Hendrick, Joby Yobi, and our esteemed guest this evening is John Hogan, author of The Great Chicago Beer Riot: How Loggers Struck. Having them come on the show to talk about the books and just learning about the history behind um, the alcohol biz, which we're all sort of I'm tangentially related to, but Joby certainly and Jason both worked directly in that business. And so, um, one of the things that's so great is just getting all of those different perspectives um, about the history, some of the smaller moments in history that aren't written about. I do want to just take a moment before I turn the mic over to you, John. There was this great moment in here, just in the preface, where you talk about, we all know about prohibition in Chicago. Like when we think speakeasies, alcohol out of the thin air, there's a progression that leads to it. So I'm looking forward to getting your perspective on that a little bit. I think, though, before we get going, is in the book, it talks about your experience as a broadcaster. So, John, tell us what's your history as in broadcast?
I worked for WGN in Chicago, which has a nationwide footprint. I was there for 16 years, serving primarily as a reporter, did a little bit of anchor work, but mostly in the field work, covering just about anything that came down the pipe, the courts, politics, police, fire, et cetera, and was out chasing the news every day with a camera crew and did that for 16 years. My foot on both sides of the microphone or the camera, if you will.
And when you were, I imagine there was a big shift in just your energy output from those two, working the beat every day and then going to media relations. Or am I wrong on that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, I'm just thinking about how much when you're out on the beat every day, that I'm thinking of the intrepid reporter all day long, that kind of thing, and then going to media relations. That must have been a time for you to relax just a little bit, anyway.
Yeah, too much of the time. That's one of the reasons I got out of the business. People see TV reporters when the act. And so it does.
And so
I have to say this real quick, Curtis, because in terms of like the natural affinity for our guests, John, it's a pleasure to have you on. As soon as I saw in your bio and reading through a little bit of the history of the WGN piece, all of a sudden the connection clicked. I grew up in Michigan City, Indiana, just around the lake. WGN, Joby, you were talking about the first segment. Go ahead, Curtis.
Well, no, Jason, you just keep hitting your cord there on your arm, and it keeps bumping out.
Oh, my little shaky.
There you go.
We're gonna have to get some new equipment here. We have to invest in the show.
Let's get there you go. Now give us.
There we go. Looks
So,
like we only had a handful of channels, and so the parallel for me that I'm envisioning and the affinity for having you on as a guest is thinking about that downtime, but also the fact that only having a small amount of media channels available, you had to be on and ready to go at any moment's notice, right? Even though you were down, kind of relaxing, maybe in between stories, if you got a call, you had to go, right? You were out on the field.
Absolutely. We were dispatched by two-way radio. I'm sure the technology has improved considerably since then, but that was our main. But Michigan City, I know well. I used to go swimming there in my younger days. Wonderful park there. And, great getaway for Chicago area people.
Getting away to the hustle and bustle, right?
Say again?
So I was just saying that I'm guessing that I mean, you have this reporter, you have your experience as a reporter, you go to do media relations, the writing aspect. When did you start focusing on becoming a writer?
Oh, kid, these kinds of stories on the page, and it evolved from there. Decided to major in journalism and was lucky enough to find a good career in that field.
And when did this all kind of turn to becoming a published author? So when you decided to start writing about beer history in particular.
Well, I didn't do a lot of extracurricular writing when I was a reporter or when I was in media relations, because I did that all day long and I didn't want to do it in my spare time. I wanted to do what you guys are doing there, drinking beer. And earlier about these little undiscovered events in history that sometimes cast a light on larger subjects. And that's how I forget, it must have been something I came across in a newspaper, some reference on this day in history or something of that nature. But there was some little spark that made me think that the beer riot would make a good subject for a book. It was one of these things that I've looked for when I've done other books, an event in Chicago history that people either know nothing about, or if they ever heard of it, it was in one ear or out the other. And
A partner in crime on this book, Judy. And so, you know, how did that collaboration come together for you in the writing of the Great Chicago Beer Riot?
well, I should probably go back to how I met Judy, but that might take up too much time. It wouldn't be what you guys would want to hear. No, I'm joking. We talk about these projects, of course, and in this case, the beer riot and the temperance movement coincided with two other major national issues that she, in fact, has been a lot more interested in than I had been heretofore. Women's movement, the that led up to the Civil War. So we had this convergence of interests and kicked it around a little bit and thought that these would roll themselves into a book treating with all subjects, but focusing primarily on the beer riot as the ultimate event.
And I think too, I mean, just to make sure that that this is all clear, is that Judy's your wife, and you know, she's the one when we see at the bottom of our Zoom screen that it says Judy and we're talking to John, we all know we all know what's happening.
She's,
I think that it
she's
really
a terrific
speaks to
writer, but she
the
doesn't
hierarchy
care
in
to
the
do
household.
interviews.
What was that, Jason?
I said I think that really speaks to the hierarchy in the household, though, and we can all relate to that. You know, we can appreciate that.
Lets her writing speak for itself.
Right. And full having a conversation about all of this. One of the I think I'll let you I'm just going to give you kind of a prompt and then we'll see where this goes, but that confluence of abolitionists, of suffrage, and of the temperance movement was incredible at that point.
Yes.
So I don't even know where to go. I just know that this I think this was one of the biggest things that kind of blew my mind as I was reading this, that all of these three things were coming together at that point.
Well, a couple of other events worldwide, in this case, that came together at the same time period were the European revolutions of 1848, where a number of countries went through very bloody convulsions, particularly in Germany. And toward the United States, and many of them wound up in Chicago. And you had two very large, in fact, the two largest communities in the city who like to drink beer and like to drink whiskey. And that's what fed into the beer riot, the powers that be telling these folks, sorry, you can't do it on your day off anymore. And one thing led to another.
You know, and that's something that really touches home for me. And I'm going to bring Joby into this piece. You know, growing up in Indiana, John, as we spoke about, I didn't know anything different. You know, we didn't allow alcohol sales on Sunday. You couldn't go to the liquor store and buy alcohol. I was always raised under the premise that it was, you know, reference to more of a religious component, you know, tied to Sunday being a religious day. Joby, when you were growing up here in California, we have needed it.
So California is actually, we think it's one of the strictest, but it's actually one of the most lax liquor laws in the whole country. I think you can go as far as 2 a.m. and depending on what city, and as early as 6 a.m., 7 days a week. When I traveled when I was younger, it always it always surprised me when a liquor store was just a liquor store. Out here, growing up, a liquor store has all kinds of stuff in it. It's almost like a convenience store that has liquor also. Whereas in other states, it's just a liquor store. And I think some of them don't even sell beer or wine. You got to go to, you can get that at the supermarket. Yeah, so I grew up with Vaughn's having aisles of liquor, aisles of beer, aisles of wine, and all that. So very, very much. Um, which that may be a good rule, but who knows? But yeah, and then Sundays, of course, and then you can't mix, you know, some places can sell liquor. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. There's some old ones about being in a bar and who can be in a bar and not. And there's even one in Ojai that's still on the books about women and bars, and it still actually is a law on the books, but it's not enforced, of course. So yeah, but we grew up pretty free with our booze, I guess you could say, out here.
One thing you can do in Chicago that I bet you can't do in several of these other states is vote in a bar.
I don't. Are the people that are tallying the votes, are they drinking also? Because that could be a big problem. Depending on which side you're on.
You mentioned Michigan City and the Chicago getaways. Indiana Dunes was another favorite getaway. When I got a little bit older, I remember going out there on Sunday and somebody would forget to bring the beer, but it was no great problem to buy it under the table if you knew where to go. And it kind of gave us a feeling of
and then you couldn't buy beer until after noon, I think it was. Like, it's something ridiculous, similar to that. And I remember the first Sunday I was in California, I went, and just so that I could go to Vaughn's at 8 o'clock in the morning and buy a 20-ounce Arrogant Bastard, put it in my case, and then bring it home. And then and then being surprised that I wasn't the only one in the line that had alcohol at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. It was that epiphany. And the beer kind, you know, the low alcohol stuff that you go to the supermarket for.
Right.
One of the angles that we explore in the book is the tremendous influence that temperance had during this period of time, the mid-19th century. There were entire states. And right before the beer riot, in fact, it came up for a vote in Illinois in a referendum and was soundly defeated. Even when everybody was predicting that it would pass and Illinois would go totally dry. So.
During your research, John, were there any other like really astounding facts that caught you off guard? That, you know, something when you were starting to break down the details for the book, you thought to yourself, "Holy society."
I'm not really sure how to answer that.
Entirely dry. Was there any one fact that maybe really caught your attention as something unique or that was different than maybe what you've experienced with any other research or discussion?
Well, I think the fusion of politics and liquor back in that era of American history was a revelation to me. Stephen Douglas, who was debates with Abraham Lincoln, at the time the most powerful politician in Illinois, very wisely courted. He equated personal popularity with his blessing on anybody who wanted to drink. He fused it. It became a political.
Society of culture, and I mean, I just think that that is that's fascinating in itself. That just drawing a parallel to anything that's happening now, it's the same kind of issues. It's those little tiny things out there. Housewives, or if it's immigrant laborers, there's always something there that can grab them, and beer is as good a point as any, really.
Well, the prohibition that led up to the beer riot were used quite obviously and blatantly. How do you like that? Now go back and shut up. That was the finer point on the beer pardon me, the beer riot.
What was, John, without giving away too much, was it purely political, or was it driven by church, religious background, or was it just a purely political move? And also, did you ever find out in your research
Sunday, and the fancy clubs and the fancy hotels would have their side entrances where the silk stocking people could come in, and they weren't drinking beer. I mean,
that's right. Martinis all around. I don't even know if they had martinis.
Performed heroically in a cholera outbreak in Chicago not long before the beer riot. In many respects, a wonderful guy, but he had some very, very deep-seated prejudices, especially against Catholics, and especially against Irish Catholics. Had no use for him. He was one of the early founders who happened to enjoy that sort of thing. Was his type of vengeance. It was like what would you call it? A revenge, a punishment.
Seems like a power move too, like an ultimate power move.
Levi Boone. Anyway, when the beer riot happened and things, reason that when Judy and I did the book, felt that the beer riot was very important to history because it broke the backs of this extremely bigoted political movement that had a grip not just in Chicago, but in other parts of the very, very powerful people.
And restrictions imposed on businesses during this COVID phenomenon and this pandemic. And that was really the impact to the business owner as well, and the increase of the liquor license from a basic $50 liquor license to a 6 times $300.
A thinly disguised move to drive tavern owners out of business, and a lot of them did because they couldn't afford the license.
Yeah, I mean that is the best way to get rid of. I don't know if "get rid of" is the right word, but that is the best way to restrict. Very minimal amounts of it, but yeah, I think it is an interesting parallel to what's happening right now. I think you talked about the state-owned liquor stores, and what I found is when this thing happened, I remember reading that those were the first ones to close their stores to their citizens, were the state. Going to sell you booze. We're closing all our state-run liquor stores, and I don't know if they reopened or what happened. I know in Colorado they closed the state-run liquor and the marijuana dispensaries on the same weekend or the same day, and there was almost a riot there too, actually. And they opened it back up. Yep, history repeating itself. And they opened back up right away. So the pressure was on there. But I think it's hard to believe that we have state-run liquor stores in some places, because it's for me as a Californian,
there's nothing like that in Illinois.
Yeah,
It's all private enterprise.
it's all private enterprise.
But in Chicago during the pandemic, they've had different ways of dealing with different types of liquor establishments. If you have food on the premises, then you're in the best of shape.
That's right. We all know
You
that.
can run fairly normally. But if you have a tavern, which is another exception that they make, if it's just the standalone tavern.
Well, I have to be careful. It doesn't when you're out drinking. So there are certain items that don't qualify as a meal for these establishments. I don't know if that's happening in Chicago, but that's. Oh yeah, it's.
Yeah.
Keep that quiet.
Content in the book, and when you're writing the focus of the lager beer riots, is there anything right now, like where all of a sudden you're going, like you mentioned earlier, this is and could be avoided? Are there any topic
Dating back to around Memorial Day, and Judy and I kicked the ball around. Do we want to get into that? Talk about it, parallels, non-parallels, and I suppose you can find them if you look for them. People who feel, for whatever reason, that they're being suppressed, that they're being treated unfairly by government or the police or society, take out their feelings and
the flashpoint of social pressures that we've talked about a number of times as we've hit all the way through, that's nothing new. And it just depends on what's causing that to go. And anyone who's listening, certainly as we talk about some of these government and regulations that are intended to disenfranchise one group or another, we can all pull those out, right? We can all say, oh yeah, that sounds like this, that sounds like that. We can all kind of not agree on the severity, but I think we could probably all come up with a top
Monday morning quarterbacking or whatnot. But when the beer riot was over, it was over. It was not an ongoing movement. Yet the air was let out of the balloon right there, and Chicago and Illinois, for that matter, moved on to better things afterward. It was a very cleansing moment, you might say.
Do you have any idea why that is, John? What was the mindset or the reasoning? Was it just the point was made and
because the focus was so narrow? The focus of the beer riot was drinking on Sunday.
Right.
The city caved in and said, okay, you can drink on Sunday.
Mission accomplished.
And by the way, we'll lower the cost of the liquor license back to where it was.
Yeah.
That removed the
they would all be solved in just one day.
So that's why I say that in that regard there was no real parallel. It was a one-trick pony, so to speak.
Right. It seems like that could be a platform that somebody could run on that. For 365 days, we're going to tackle one issue every single day and just knock this out and get it done with.
That'd be fantastic. But it also makes me think. Yeah, there you go. It also makes me think. What
you got one vote.
Some of these Sunday laws, they still exist, right? Like in others. And why hasn't anybody? Well, and that's. I mean, I have family in Florida, and same thing. They go to. I think they go over to Georgia, and they get their stuff on Sundays. Yeah. But there's always a way, and that's what cracks me up about all these laws and all these prohibitions, is that there's always a way. People will always find a way to get it.
But it's interesting to me and comical how long it takes for some societies and states to address these. To your point, Joby, I mean, again, going back to my home state of Indiana, they just opened up liquor sales on Sundays 2 years ago, so that's something that it took us how many decades to get to a place where the community said, hey, this seems like it's okay, it's not a big deal,
Like there was no imbibing on Sunday anyway, and that was the other ridiculous thing too. Is then there was just a run on beer on Saturday so that you had enough for the football game, right? So.
Some reporter asked Kamala Harris the other day if she ever smoked marijuana.
Oh, God.
She says, "My family's from Jamaica. Are you kidding?"
An honest answer. Oh, there you go.
I like that. John, I want to ask a little bit about the content of the book from a visual standpoint, though. Thinking about some of the old photography and some of the imagery that's used in the book, who was responsible and how was that process handled in terms of getting like the visual impact of the book put together?
My very good friend and neighbor, Matthew Owens, who is an absolutely terrific artist. You have a chance to thumb through the book, did a number of sketches to fill in where in Chicago. That's Matthew's work. That's where I filled in most of the blanks, since photos of 1848 and 1855 just ain't there. So that was and another friend of mine did some hand drawings, and that's one of the challenges when you're dealing with a book that goes that far back.
And I think, well, and there are, there's a handful of photos throughout, but you're right that this was there's several different kind of formats for the Arcadia Press, and so for anyone who is interested and wants to purchase their own copy, you can go to arcadiapublishing.com. You can get this, or you can Google search Amazon if you are an Amazon. If you agree with Amazon, I guess I'll put it that way. So you can find the book, but as now I just lost it because I got sidetracked on doing the Amazon. We're talking about the pictures in the book. Oh, the two different kinds of publications from Arcadia, where we've looked at one where it was really just a pictorial history.
I think my books, and I'm certainly not a spokesperson for Arcadia, but I think my books contain a little bit more narrative than the typical Arcadia book. You're absolutely right. They're very heavy on visuals, and a good job they do. The next book I have in mind, I'm thinking of leaning very, very heavy on visuals and keeping the narrative to a lesser amount.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, John, would you consider yourself a historian or more of like a Chicago enthusiast? What do you feel drives your insight and your desire to write? Is it more about your locality, or is it more just about generalized history?
It used to be beer, but not anymore.
Doctor.
No, I've always loved to write. As we were discussing a little bit earlier, somebody raised a question. It's something I've always enjoyed doing. And if you can't find something to write about in Chicago, you're not trying. And there's a lot of it that hasn't been discovered, and a lot of it that needs to be rediscovered. So it's there if anybody has a mind to do it.
And I'm just thinking about how long did the research process for you?
Maybe a year.
A year or so.
Yeah.
And then when it comes in terms of editing, rewriting, and those kinds of things, what was that process like for you? The editing. What was the editing? The editing and the revising. What was that part of the process like for you?
It's not a big part for me. I'm pretty much a one draft guy. I get to where I want to get usually very close the first time around. So I'm not one of these writers who does a lot of rewriting, a lot of revision, whatnot. What I put down, I'd say is roughly 90% of the way it comes out in the end. And history presses, I think very good in that respect. They work very well with writers. They're not picky. They're not trying to tell you what you should be saying or how to say it better. You know, they give you a free hand and step in where it needs to be stepped in, and it's it's a good way to go, and they're a pleasure to work with.
So you teased us with a project that you're working on.
Chicago's Motor Row. It's about 2 miles due south of downtown Chicago, where every car manufacturer between 1914 and maybe the onset of the Depression, 1929, 1930, was represented. It was just block after block of automobile sales, service, you name it. There was nothing like it in the whole country. And they sold cars out of showrooms that were at street level, and the cars were behind plate glass windows. It was a whole new concept of shopping. The buildings, many of them were done by famous architects. The buildings themselves were worth the price of admission, so to speak. And as were the cars. I'm not a car buff per se, but for somebody who is, this would be, if it ever gets off the ground, the book for them.
And is there a physical footprint of that still there in that space?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, many of the buildings are still there. In fact, some of them have their original titles pounded right into the terracotta or the cement where the building is built out of. There's one in particular that comes to mind that says Locomobile at the top of the 2 or 3 story building. I guess you'd have to be a car buff to even remember a Locomobile. I don't know how long they've been out of business, but that was the whole concept of this this motor row for just literally 2 miles on end of classic emporiums that's sold every car available in America. So I hope I can do it.
I hope so too. I am a car buff, so I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, well, you know more about it than I do. I have a friend who's a car buff who's supposed to be.
I didn't know about this Chicago Road. That's amazing.
Yeah, you should check it out, Joey. The
Motor Row.
Locomobile. There's some interesting models that I'm looking it up right now. This would be something right in your alleyway of interest. John, one of the other things that you alluded to was being a beer enthusiast at one time. Was there a preferred brand or preferred style of beer that was on your desk during the writing of this book? Is there a beer that you held above the rest?
Oh, I've was always a big fan of Guinness Stout. I love Guinness. I love the Germans that helped me put the Beer Riot book together would be scandalized, but I do like English beer very much, almost as much as German beer. And American beers, the regular brands, Miller Draft, MGD was fine with me. I was never a great connoisseur. I'd get one brand, I'd stick with it.
You enjoyed the beer. That's all it took, right? You just enjoyed the beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, I gotta know. Sorry, the statute of limitation is up. Did you ever enjoy a beer while you were waiting for a story to happen?
Yes. Oh, yes. Many times.
Fantastic.
I came out of,
Every time, man. I love it. So, tell us about that.
It was journalism was a different world back then. That's the subject for a whole other program if you ever want to do it.
All right.
I think I came in at the very tail end of the old fabled journalist of the 20s and 30s and 40s and so on, where drinking was a very, very large part of the game.
As it should be.
Before, during, and after.
As it should be.
It makes me think of Mad Men, sort of the martini lunch where you would roll in 9-10 o'clock in the morning to your into Manhattan, and then you go have a 3, 4, 5 martini lunch, and then I guess
maybe go back to the office
and then do work. I don't know how that happened.
Well, if you decided to tip a few at lunch, you dreaded that call that would come in immediately afterward or even during lunch.
Right.
We'll cover this hot story.
Yeah.
Yeah, being on call that would be a tough one to do, certainly. Well, John, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight and talking about the beer riot, the Great Chicago Beer Riot. It was a fabulous conversation. When we led into this, we did give you a heads up that we were going to ask you about a car, and since you were just finishing talking about cars, that's what kind of reminded me of it was we were talking about in the opening segment car shows. Now we were talking
Car
about car
shows, pop culture.
pop
Pop
culture,
culture TV shows.
TV shows, and mostly vehicle, not just cars, because we were talking about motorcycles and some other things too. Do you have an iconic pop culture reference for your generation of that would be like cars or vehicle related, and something that stands out to you? It was a TV show or radio show or something that you, or movie that everyone you knew went to.
That's a tall order. Judy and I just watched for the umpteenth time the other night an outstanding documentary, the best jazz documentary ever made, called Jazz on a Summer's Day. And it was a documentary based on the 1958 Newport Jazz Festival. So I say that by way of preference that culturally I was a maverick when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, because I broke with rock and roll at a very early age and became a jazz buff.
I see.
So I'd have to say Dave Brubeck and
Sure.
a lot of the West Coast jazz people, Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan. These people became my idols culturally back then.
So
Do you play, John? Do you have an instrument, or did you play at one time?
Say again?
Did you play? Do you have an instrument, or were you involved in the jazz scene, or did you just appreciate
I don't, but I'll plug my California nephews, the three Hogan brothers, who operate out of the Bay Area and have been doing podcasts, such as we're doing right here, for the last half year or so. And they're outstanding. I don't want to typecast them as jazz musicians. They do a lot of jazz, hip hop, new wave stuff. It's very, very enjoyable. So no, any musical talent I had or would have had skipped me and went on to them.
I think we have to get your nephews on the podcast.
Check them out, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, the great Hogan brothers. I love it.
Oh, they may be watching. I don't know. I might have tipped them off as to what we were doing tonight. So.
Well, John, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening. Again, you can find the Great Chicago Beer Riot, How Lager Struck a Blow to Liberty. You can find it on arcadiapress.com, or you can do a Google search for it, or go to Amazon, and you can find your copy right there as well. Thank you again so much for